Ms. Dunn.
Good afternoon. My name is Katie Dunn, and I'm Associate General Counsel for Local 32BJ, which is a property services local up and down the East Coast. As part of my job at 32BJ, I research and give advice on social media issues, and I've also spoken on these issues at various conferences. As SEIU explained in its written remarks, we are wholly supportive of the board's modest efforts to expand the types of employee contact information that employers are obligated to provide via the Excelsior list. In fact, we've recommended that the board expand eligibility list information to ensure that it has the flexibility to adapt to technological changes over time. As my time is short, I'd like to limit my remarks this afternoon to why it's unnecessary for the board to restrict the use of the eligibility list to purposes related to the representation proceeding and related board proceedings, or to require the use of third-party platforms or massed emails. These measures are unnecessary because unions already comply with a comprehensive federal scheme that sets forth numerous compliance requirements and penalties. The CAN-SPAM Act was passed in 2003 to craft a nationwide remedy for unwanted and deceptive email. CAN-SPAM bars senders of email from sending material, misleading, or false information, and sets forth penalties for misuse. In addition, commercial emails must include features such as opt-outs and accurate subject line headings. Similarly, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, or the TCPA, regulates unsolicited calls and texts to residential or cellular telephone lines via autodialers. It sets forth consumer protections such as opt-outs and carries steep penalties for violations of the Act. Finally, there are also industry groups such as the CTIA and the MMA that issue additional recommendations. There are already many cooks in this technological kitchen. While the primary purpose of these regulations is to protect consumers in commercial relationships, they have created a best practices atmosphere in both the commercial and the nonprofit world. Individuals have been conditioned to expect certain functionalities in their emails, such as the ability to unsubscribe from receiving future communications. Because of this, even though they are not required to do so, many unions who regularly communicate with their members by text and email have text and email messaging programs that comply with the highest commercial standards. This ensures that members continue to elect to receive union communications and that they view our electronic messaging in a positive light. Employers are no different than unions in this respect, and many set up programs to communicate electronically with clients and consumers. It is worth noting that despite the privacy concerns that various employer groups have voiced in their comments, many employers reserve the right to share email addresses with third parties. I checked the website terms of use for many of the employer groups that have appeared before you as part of your rulemaking, and several of them, including the Chamber of Commerce, the American Hospital Association, and the National Federation of Independent Business, all reserve the right to share email addresses with third parties. Because of the regulatory scheme that I just outlined, these employer practices, like the board's proposal, are not a big deal. Email addresses have become the equivalent of postal addresses in the brick and mortar world. They are quite literally where people receive their mail online. Workers know how to respond to unwanted email, whether it's by blocking the sender or marking the email as spam, just as they learned how to cope with unwanted bulk mail. Adding an additional layer of board regulation to the present scheme is thus unnecessary and could have the unintended effect of complicating union compliance with existing regulations. Finally, I would like to briefly respond to the wild speculation that unions may purposefully infect employer computers with viruses during an election campaign. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act expressly prohibits attempting to access another's computer with the malicious intent to cause damage. Thus, not only is there no logical incentive for unions to participate in this type of behavior, it is already prohibited by law. Email and telephone communication is not new. Additional regulation by the NLRB is unnecessary and will not further the goals of an informed electorate and a decrease in litigation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a couple follow-ups.
I figured.
Very interesting. Sorry. So a few things here. One, let's just assume from the perspective of union speech, quasi-political, it shouldn't be subjected to kind of commercial type of regulation on the one hand. But let's also assume that there's some concern over employees' personal email information because it is qualitatively different because it doesn't occupy physical space like a house where anyone can walk by and see where the house is. Is your position on the opt-out matter such that if employees were regulated or unions were regulated by the board to require an unsubscribe feature, even though that you say that's a best practice already, that would address concern over the opt-out because it would lessen the intrusion?
I think it's unnecessary for the board to make such prescription to require things such as an unsubscribe. One, because I think that's what unions have no interest in continuing to contact people who they don't want the union to contact them. And I think that to the extent that the board gets into technical regulations of contemporary technologies, you're going to run into trouble in the future just because technologies change so rapidly. If there was, for example, some sort of misuse of the list by a union, hypothetically, the board would have the power in an election, in a case, to respond and craft an appropriate remedy without prospectively saying what unions or employers, for that matter, need to include in their email communications.
But I guess the concern is that some commenters have expressed, and at least expressed a bit in the dissent, is if you're not going to have an opt-in on the front end before the information goes over to the union, why wouldn't you at least have it on the back end if this is somebody's personal email address?
I mean, is the proposal, though, that if that was required for unions to have some type of opt-out, that employers would also be required to have a similar opt-out? So that employees could tell their employers that they would choose to no longer receive any type of communications from their employer.
Right. Well, I don't think we can regulate complete symmetry in the terms and conditions of employment in private employers. In essence, a lot of these employers employees have consented to turn that information over. Maybe in some cases they haven't. What I'm trying to just feel out is your position on whether an opt-out on the back end is something that we should end up regulating. Or do you basically think unions should be left to their own devices with this information when they have it?
I think that it's unnecessary, one, because of the best practices that I described, and also just because employees are able to essentially do this on their own, whether it's by marking the emails from the union as spam or otherwise blocking the communications from the union. And so it's simply unnecessary for the board to get into that type of regulation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.